We're using regenerative agriculture as an umbrella term because there are lots and lots of what we call regenerative practices, such as longer rotations, cover crops, green manures, legumes, compost, organic fertilizers. We heard a lot of options from Fernando, and we will hear lots of options. There are lots of agricultural systems such as organic agriculture, agroforestry, agroecology, permaculture, holistic grazing. Then we have Rehi talking on intensively time managed, on poultry in row crops, and as well as that holistic grazing and so on. So what we're trying to do here is be inclusive, not exclusive. We want people to, doesn't matter what your system is, it's like a toolbox. There'll be tools that you can use. It's not us telling you, you do this is the set of rules. This is you as producers going, this is a toolbox, and these are some of the tools that will be best for my system. Because I'm a farmer. As one farmer to other farmers, we know that each of us has to do it in our own way. When things are too prescriptive and there's a simple sort of menu, that's when you set up farming for failure. Your own knowledge of your own system is critical. But I want to start with organic matter and topsoil, because essentially pretty well all life on this planet is dependent, or all terrestrial life I should say, is dependent on really a few inches, a few centimetres of rich topsoil. That's where basically our food comes from. And it's a very fragile thing that we're destroying at an incredible rate. At the same time, we can regenerate it. And so the thing that makes topsoil as different from subsoil is organic matter. These are the residues from plants, green manures, residues from animals. And by recycling organic matter, we're actually building the primary fertility. The best way to put it this way is that when we start recycling plants, material, into our soil, we're actually giving complete fertility to our soils, because essentially what plants have are all the nutrients that plants need. There are exceptions where we've got specific deficiencies in the soil, and I haven't got time to talk about that, but where we have to correct deficiencies, and I'm not saying recycling organic matter is the key for everything, but it is the key for most things in getting your soil right. There still will be things like, in Brazil, in my country, we have major problems with phosphorus. In wet tropical areas like here, you'll find that you're always low on boron because it leaches out. So we need to, there are still nutrient management systems that we have to use, but by getting organic matter there, you will provide most of them, and most of them at low or no cost. However, it's more than just a fertilizer, and this is what I want to talk about. So, I want to continue on from when I was talking yesterday, for those who are here, about how we can pull down enough carbon that we can reverse climate change with regenerative farming. But we're in climate change now. And anybody who doesn't think so couldn't be farming, because those of us who've been farming for a long time know that the certainty we had in seasons are no longer there. We're getting longer droughts, we're getting rain when we don't want to have rain, we're not getting it when we want to have it, and when we have it, it tends to be quite destructive. And this is a really important issue for us as farmers, for our profitability, but it's actually an important issue for the whole planet in terms of food security. because everybody has to eat. A lot of people don't realise that these days. And a lot of people don't actually realise that food doesn't come out of McDonald's, it actually comes from farms. So, what I just want to show you here is some, I'm not going to read through it, but we have lots of good scientific evidence that good regenerative systems where we increase soil organic matter, build up the topsoil, are more resilient to climate change. And I want to take you through it and show you. So, here is an example of a long-term field trial. In this case, it's in Switzerland, where one system has been incrementally increasing soil organic matter. The other system has been based on best practice conventional farming, and that has been incrementally decreasing soil organic matter. On planting, there has been heavy rain. If you look at the conventional one, under best practice conventional, most of that soil has washed away. You can see that sheen on the field. And those of us that work in farming know that the best way to describe that, it's like a tabletop. That nice sheen prevents water from infiltrating. It runs off with the soil. You know, you can have a heavy rain event and go to where that sheen is, put your finger through, and after about, a few centimetres, it'll be bone dry. The water hadn't gone in. It's run off with the soil. That crop is a disaster. It has to be replanted. The one where we build up the organic matter, that goes on to provide a good yield. Most of the water has infiltrated. Very little of the soil has run off. And so let's take you further into the science on this to show you. This is an example, once again, of another long-term field trial. In this case, it's in Pennsylvania, in the USA. And it's the same soil, but different treatments. One that has increased the soil organic matter, the other one where the farming system has decreased it. You get that soil, and it's a good exercise to do it. I do it when I have field days on my farm, and I go across to my neighbour's farm, get his soil from his conventional sugarcane and my soil, and I can show exactly the same thing. You put the soil in water, one just erodes, it collapses, the other one keeps its integrity and absorbs water. Now eventually, long enough, the one with the high levels of organic water, if you leave it in there long enough, it's going to collapse. But one will have clean water, the other one, is the dirt that runs in and puts the nutrients in our creeks and rivers and goes out to our reef systems and kills it. One of the big reasons for the death of reef systems around the world is the excess soil coming in, as well as the pesticides in that soil. So now I actually want to start going deeper into the science and explain one of the key parts of organic matter. Organic matter is infinitely complex. It's like snowflakes. Each one is different. But there are main components. For instance, sandy soils generally capture less than clay soils, but this average is good enough for you to understand the concept. So in my country, most of Africa, most of Asia, the levels of soil organic matter are 1% or less. On my own farm, I started with, 1% was the highest. And that's why I put it there. Now, that means that you can store about 160,000 litres of water in the first 30 centimetres, first foot per hectare. And as you increase it, you can start going up to, and I'll put 6% here, which is close to a megalitre, because in my own farm, I went from less than 1% to an average of 6%. In some places I took it up to 9, but an average of 6% in 11 years. So it's doable. And I know examples of now people have done this much better and much quicker than I have. So I went from, I live in a similar climate to this with a dry season, spending my whole dry season irrigating. I haven't turned on my irrigation equipment for 15 years now, and I'm really scared that I ever have to, because I think by now it needs to all be replaced. 15 years without any maintenance, because I haven't used it. But, so, I just want to show you this. This is Pennsylvania again. I showed you the two soils. The one that held the water and the one that collapsed. They actually came from these two fields. And this is corn in a drought. The one with the organic matter, it, you know, if you have a look at it there, you can see it doesn't know it's got a drought because it's held the water. The other one, the conventional, it's in drought. And the difference in yield is that these ones with organic matter are getting 30% higher yield. And this is good peer-reviewed science led by Dr. David Pimentel from Cornell University. We have a lot of papers like this now, a lot of evidence to show that these systems are higher yielding in the long term, because always, so when we average out the good years and the bad years, because in the bad years these systems still give you a good yield, you get higher returns. If you've got 1% organic matter, so I don't spill it all on myself. If I've got 1% organic matter and it rains, this is what I can capture. Now, if I get more rain, what is going to happen? It all runs off. We don't, you know, we don't keep it on the farm. Normally it's running off with our most precious asset, our topsoil. If we've got the organic matter, it absorbs. Look, so I've got these as an example. This is some compacted soil with virtually no organic matter I've found. Runs off. Now some's coming in. Now let's see what happens in here. So you can see this one's absorbed it with the organic matter. Same soil, I've got them only a few metres apart. One has organic matter, one doesn't. So I want to get this concept across. How important having this is in your soil, and the difference you can make and what you can store. You know, a lot of soils, that's all you can store. But you want to build up your soil so you can store this amount. And you know, I'll put the 6%. Think about it. You're storing a megalitre per hectare at the best place to store it, at the root zone of your crop. You don't have to have big overhead you know, sprays and sprinklers and pumps and spend all this diesel. It's there already. You think about the most cheapest and effective way to irrigate. So, and really importantly is this, is that when we get these destructive heavy rain events, instead of most of it running off, we can capture it and keep it so we've got the soil moisture for our crops, whether we're doing row cropping or whether we've got pastures or whether we've got perennial tree crops or whatever. But the fact is that these sorts of systems get higher yields. You know, we have some very, very good data showing that these systems are high yielding in the long term. And I want to get this across because that's really important news for us as farmers, and I'll talk more about how we can make them lower cost, because as a farmer, no one likes to actually pay us more. Everybody likes us to spend more. Lowering our production costs is critical, as well as getting high yields for our survival. That's our money. So let's talk about how we do it as farmers and what we're doing as farmers. And what we're doing as farmers we're solar energy collectors. We're using photosynthesis to collect solar energy, and that's the basis of our crops. Through photosynthesis, unfortunately it's probably a bit hard to see, but I put up the basic what I call the most important molecule of life, the reaction that powers our system. And that's 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gas that we've got too much in the atmosphere. The plants will take 6 of those down, combine them with 6 molecules of water, and use the energy, solar energy, photosynthesis, and they produce glucose, the basic molecule of life, and the byproduct is oxygen that we breathe. Pretty incredible, But, and what I'd like to say here is, in any plant, you look at any of these plants, 95, in most cases, 98% of what you see, its biomass, comes from water and carbon dioxide through the use of sunlight. And that's the bulk of the plant. And yet, how many of you have done agronomy and taught, well, let's manage the 95% or 98%? No, we don't. We talk about the 2 to 5% which comes from the soil. Now that is really important. Don't get me wrong, I'm talking about building topsoil. But we build the soil through managing the 95 to 98%. I want people to start rethinking, instead of, it's all about throwing minerals and fertilizer in the soil. It's not all about that. Yes, that is an important part of what we do. But let's start talking about this and what this means and how this really powers our system. I want you to rethink that what actually happens is that around 33% of these products from photosynthesis, the roots actually secrete into the soil and feed the soil microbes, and that's how we build soil. And I'll go into more detail, but first I just want to explain glucose. This is what comes from photosynthesis, and this is the molecule of life. Cane sugar, sucrose, dextrose, lactose, which is milk sugar, maltose, malt sugar, and so on. There's galactose. There's so many different sugars, but they're all built from glucose. The other way you can combine it together, and this is really important for us as well, plants actually combine glucose, which is water soluble, with water and make an insoluble product called cellulose. It's also a sugar. Lose is lactose, dextrose, maltose, glucose. O's means sugar. This is actually long chains of cellulose, wood, leaves, what we see in plants. Most of what we see there is sugar, again, put in long chains. And microorganisms have the ability to break that back down to glucose and water. And that sugar actually feeds the soil cycle. It's really important to get this across. The other way we can do it, you can get the sugars and you can put a bit of hydrogen into them, and we make carbohydrates, which is our starch. Do you want to stop her from spilling? I've got those. We can make, flour, potatoes, we can actually then, that molecule again, we can just tweak it a little bit, and we call it a hydrocarbon. That's fats, oils, what we live on, what these cars are on, that are fossilized hydrocarbon. This is photosynthesis from, hundreds of millions of years ago that's been trapped and we're using, but it's very old solar energy. It's fossil solar energy. The other thing that plants can do, and they do in their leaves, the other thing I want to get across is that all this synthesis of all these products are done in the leaves. The leaves do more than just photosynthesize and make glucose. These are solar factories that do numerous thousands of compounds that they manufacture using solar energy. Another very important one they manufacture is amino acids, where they add a bit of nitrogen and sometimes sulfur to these glucose molecules. And amino acids are our proteins, our DNA, our saliva, our hormones. All that comes out of amino acids. And most amino acids we need to get out of our diet. We need to get from photosynthesis. They make all this, but without that, amino acids, plants wouldn't survive as well. So that all comes from photosynthesis. So virtually everything in life, everything we know, there's a couple of exceptions that we've found, relies on the products of photosynthesis on plant leaves. So what I want to talk about here is that what we need to do to make good, efficient farming systems is maximize our solar collectors. In other words, get as much of the energy falling on our farms through leaf area to power our system. And so normally I talk about how we can also use it for pest and disease control and to a degree for weed control. I haven't got time today. I'm mostly talking about soil. I'll touch on a little bit with weeds because when we talk about the soils and feeding the soils and getting this biology happening is what we want is to get lots of those products of photosynthesis. In other words, the cellulose, let that break down in the soil as glucose, and that's the primary food source for all the microorganisms that give us multiple benefits. That is the building block, and these microbes when they break down the plant residues and animal residues, they're also releasing all the other nutrients. Because don't forget, you've got nitrogen and phosphorus and calcium and potassium and sulfur and trace elements. They're all in the plants as well. And they get released and fed to the system by breaking it down. But what is powering the system, the energy source, is the glucose that was fixed by photosynthesis. One of the reasons I'm not a big fan of biochar is that when you char it, you're burning cellulose. That's the energy for charring it. I'd rather have that cellulose break down in the soil and feed my system. You'll still get heaps of carbon. The other one I want to talk about is what we call the carbon gift. The gift of carbon to the soil. How do we get carbon into the soil? Well, look, you can buy tons of biochar or lots of compost, buy that, put that in. But the easiest and most efficient way is we grow it. What happens is these plants are fixing the carbon out of the atmosphere and are synthesizing it into all these different compounds. Now, when roots grow, they put out a whole range of different compounds. One of they put out compounds that change the pH. They put out compounds as lubricants because the soil is a really abrasive substance. you only got to see what it does to our implements. And roots are some of the most delicate, fine, have virtually got no strength. How do they grow in such a abrasive system? They put in lubricants, they loosen the soil. They also have leaf sheaths. The best way to say, if you looked at a flower bud and you see what we call the sepals, the first petals that protect the flower, it's the same with a root. They have these harder sheaths over the tip, and as they grow, they shed them. And what happens there is that it's estimated over the life of a plant, around 33%, a third of what they have photosynthesized is shed by the roots in the soil. So we say if we look at this tree here, and our general rule of thumb is what we see above is below, so you can see what was the leaf area, the root area will be fairly similar. There are exceptions, but that's a good rule of thumb. But there's another third again that has been put in as carbon. So look at that tree, look at all that, and on top of the roots, that much carbon extra that tree has put into the soil. That's what our crops do if we properly manage them. We're using photosynthesis, and as they grow, they're building soil. Roots are really important for building soil. And we'll talk more about it, because around the roots is where most microbes live. We call it the rhizosphere. But what I want to really talk about here is to rethink now weed management. And the word I use is ground cover management, cover crop management. Instead of eradicating and having bare soil, think about systems where we can turn, in many cases, the worst weeds, return them into the soil, and have all that nutrient, all that cellulose, all going back into the soil, powering our system. With these sorts of systems, we can really improve fertility. So, unfortunately this is not going to show it very well. I'll just go straight to this one. What I want to demonstrate is this, and this is a real key to weed management. When we cut a plant, it no longer has, you cut the top of a plant, it no longer has the leaf area to feed the roots. To get back to what I'm saying, the 98% of plants, 95% is to do with photosynthesis. Plants mainly feed from their roots, from their leaves, not from their roots. Water they get from the roots, and 2 to 5% of the nutrients, but 95% to 98%, depending on the plant, comes from the leaves. If we cut the leaves of a plant, it no longer can produce the nutrients to feed the roots. What happens then is that the plant has two options. You can let all the roots die. If it does that, it doesn't get any water, it's going to die. That's not a really good option. A better option is to shed off the roots that are surplus to what you feed and look after a certain amount, the roots that are in the same balance as your leaves. And as the leaves grow, you can grow more roots. So this is a really good example looking at a perennial grass. And what happens when you graze it or cut it. So you've got very long roots when you've got the full leaves. The more you graze it, the more you cut it, the more roots that are shed off. So let's talk about how we can use that for management. Think about that root mass of the tall growing grass there, and that would be very competitive with our crop. The one that we have cut the leaf off, all those roots now shed off, so those roots aren't competitive, and very importantly, all that organic matter of those roots start to break down and feed the system. What we're starting to do now is turn the weeds from being a parasite in our crop to our crop being a parasite on the weeds. Our crop takes, the weeds now feed instead of taking the nutrients in cover crop management. Unfortunately, you can't quite see it here, but what I wanted to illustrate there is, as long as if we grow a crop, we keep the ground covers lower, shorter than our cash crop. So the most important thing with weed competition is sunlight. That's get back to 98%, 95%. We don't want the cover crop, or whatever we want to call it, weed, competing and taking sunlight from our cash crop. We want our cash crop to get every photon it can. It's okay, and I'll talk about later, it's okay for the cover crop to get the photons that our cash crop aren't using. There's no point wasting them. By letting our cover crop grow tall, our cash crop grow tall, its roots go deeper, so that they're actually getting access to the water, they're getting access to the nutrients, keeping the, I'll use the word cover crop, small, means that they are not competing now. Unfortunately, there I can't show you, but I've got really good real-world examples that we've done to get high yields, double crops. So this is my own farm. I thought I'd show you this because you can't really see it, but hidden in there is my tractor. You might be able to see the exhaust pipe sticking out of it. But this is they're the same grasses that you guys have got here. You know, at the end of the wet season, the grasses, and on there I also have a whole range of legumes, such as, it's a different mucuna than what I've heard you've got. We have a good mucuna, and things like centro, calopo, which are climbing legumes, and that's 3 meters tall, 10 feet tall, higher than me and my tractor at the end of the wet season, and I slash that down. So this is, you can I hope you can kind of see the topsoil, the difference. I had no topsoil, I had less than 1%. That is about 60 centimetres deep, and an average of 6% organic matter. I did that in 11 years. I had a pH originally of 4.5 when I went there. Now it's 6.5, which is what I want. The other thing is that I improved the nutrients, and I want to talk about this as well. That with these systems, we can actually get a lot of our nutrients for free. There's still some things I need to bring on because of the nature of the soil. My soil is particularly calcium and boron, but through good management, I've increased the nutrients at the same time, taken off tons and tons of, in my case, fruit per hectare. So this is another example. I just want to talk about the same principle again. It's what we call pasture cropping. It's a no-till system that doesn't use herbicides. And it works on perennial pastures. And this, with the right choice of species and the right timing, can work in any climate. The only one where at this stage it wouldn't work is Antarctica, but given the way climate change is going, we might be able to get it happening there very soon. Because the first trees are already growing on the Antarctic Peninsula, which is, a bit of a worry. So, but what happens here is it works on the principle that annuals come up through perennials. So by, in this case, using holistic grazing management and grazing down the system, and sometimes we will run a mulcher over it if there's other things left, just to get it right down. And in this case, he's modified no-till equipment. The reason why it has to be modified is because the pasture is still living. You've still got lots of live roots. You've actually got to toughen it up so that the coulters can basically cut through the root mass and plant the annuals into it. In this case, it's oats. Oats are one of the best cover crops and cash crops. In this case, he's using it as both. Then, you know, when they harvest it, you can't really see it under there, but what you should be seeing is nice green pasture. You can put the animals back on. Now, this particular farmer now, in the beginning, because our soils are so low in phosphorus, had to put in a bit of phosphorus to get the system started, but now it puts nothing on. Has no cost for ploughing compared to his neighbours who have the cost of all the diesel and time ploughing and preparing the fields, the cost of fertilisers, herbicides and so on, insecticides, and he gets the same yield. But his costs are virtually nothing, really the cost of seed and a little bit of diesel for planting, you know, it's not a real lot. But then he can put the animals back on, so he gets a second income. He earns twice the amount per hectare as his neighbours. He did this out of desperation one day, you know, thinking he'd be able to grow a few oats for his sheep because he was about to lose his farm. Now he's one of the most profitable farmers in Australia, actually. This is a comparison study done by Dr. Christine Jones, who's one of the world's leading soil scientists. And her, Cole Seiss's one, which is the darker one, you see on the left-hand side, they've built up something like it's done an average of 8 tonnes a hectare of soil organic matter increase a year, it worked out. But really importantly, you can see also the increase in nutrients. The only nutrient he put in the beginning was a bit of phosphorus. Calcium is up 177%, magnesium 38%, potassium 40%, sulphur 57%, phosphorus 51%. The fact is, Australian soils do have phosphorus, that just locked up, and I'll talk a bit more about how to unlock it with biology. That's what's happened there. He needed a bit of phosphorus to kick-start it. Now he doesn't. The biology is getting all the phosphorus. And, you know, it's the same, you know, nitrogen is up 48%, copper 102%, zinc, so on. I will finish talking about nitrogen management and how you can do it without getting it in bags, and how we do it and how we can get all the nitrogen we need, and good nitrogen. So let's start talking about management. The young plants, like when grasses and plants are first growing, they're composed mostly of cellulose. And older plants actually you have what are called lignans. Cellulose is the wood. Lignans are these polymers that allow plants to flex. So as plants grow in age, they get more lignans. I'll talk more about lignans. Lignans make humus, but at this stage, I just want to talk about getting energy into the system. And this is where, you know, if we use young plants, for instance, you know, one of the techniques is to grow a cover crop and have it young and actually graze it down. You know, in the process of grazing down, it's trampled down, the roots go in, and all that then breaks down, because it's young and mostly cellulose, breaks down to glucose and gives energy to the system. Then you can actually put the cash crop in, and that system is full of nutrients. But essentially what we're trying to do is look at how we can increase the amount of glucose, energy, into the system to feed the soil microbiome. And unfortunately you can't really see it, but I just wanted to give you an idea of the amount of, this is in acres, the amount of microbes in the soil, in an average soil. And, you know, for instance, bacteria, the number per acre is over 800 trillion. And that if you could get them all out and weigh them, that's 2,600 pounds of them an acre. The actinomycetes, which are actually a really important One, because they do things like eat bacteria, and each time one eats another, bits of nutrient leak, and you get this steady supply of nutrients to our crops. There's about 1,300. Fungi are really important. I'll go into some of it, I haven't got time to go into it now, but they are so important to help plants increase their roots and get up nutrients. And good soil, we have about 2,600 pounds of fungi hyphae, and things like algae, and algae generally fix nitrogen. They photosynthesize, and they are really important to have them in the soil. And things like protozoas are really important. They eat the Actinomycetes and the bacteria, and each time they do that, they release more nutrients. And then there's earthworms and nematodes and all these others. But what happens is that they all have roles, very important roles. So one of the really important ones, for instance, are fungi that put out, in this case, they go into the roots, and they have their hyphae, their long strands that goes out into the soil, and they mine nutrients. They have enzymes that can unlock nutrients, such as phosphorus. In many systems, most of the phosphorus plants get is actually through associations with fungi, and they bring that into the plant in exchange for glucose. Because they live in the soil, they can't photosynthesize, they've got no sunlight, they do a deal with the plant. You give me sugar, I'll give you phosphorus, I'll give you potassium, you know, and it works very well. That's the way it works in nature. The other one, this one here is what we call van fungi. The other one, you see the luminous green, that's called glomalin, and that's a product the fungi put out that, along with humus, works like reinforcement rods to keep the soil stable. It's another really important reason for fungi. And using fungicides and a lot of fertilizers, you'll kill these. You won't get this. You're wasting a valuable resource. Really importantly then, is what they do is that they promote good soils. Like I was trying to say, with this, now I put a bit of water on it, it's softened up, and it's what we want. This is what we want to see. This is actually built up from little bits and assembled by the microbes. And each of these we call a ped. And a good ped, like that, I should be able to break down, and what do we have? Smaller peds. And if I get the smaller ped and break it down, what do I get? Smaller peds. We call this structure. We want this crumb structure. Now what it means is we now have air spaces through here. As well as being really good at holding water. Now, as you saw here, this has now held all the water I poured in. It didn't run off, whereas this one, it all ran off. A little bit's gone in there, but most of it's run off. And of course, the other thing you can see here is that just that little bit of water wasn't much, but this is now collapsed. It's got no structure. That will erode into the creek and into the reef. I actually put more water in this than I don't. Has structure. But what we want is lots of spaces here. The spaces are really important also for the roots. Like I said, soil is very abrasive, and roots aren't stupid. They'll take the line of least resistance and go down. If they've got spaces, they'll grow in there. And that's where the air is, because air is equally important to plants. You get waterlogged soils and no air, we can lose a lot of crops very, very quickly. There's only a few species that are adapted to living in water or being water logged. Most of what we grow is not adapted to living in water. Rice is probably the only exception. So we need it aerated, but the other reason why we need soil to be aerated, because one is oxygen is what we all need. We can live, best way to put it is this, the roots of plants need oxygen. We can live, and so with plants, weeks without eating, days without drinking, how long without breathing? You know, and that's the same for plants. They need oxygen like us. Some plants have the ability to get the oxygen from the leaves and transport it to the roots. And they can do that to a degree. But most roots have to get their oxygen where they are. Those cells are just like us. They need oxygen, they transpire. So we need soils with oxygen. So we need, the advantage of these soils, we need soils that can hold lots of water and lots of oxygen. And that's what this does. The other one, look, you know, the other one which is obvious to see here, that's the surface here. This soil I pick up, it's full of roots. This soil's got nothing. They're right next to each other. One's compacted, no organic matter. This thing here, this is what the plants want. But the other reason for air is not just oxygen. What's the major component of air? Sorry? Nitrogen, exactly. And do you want to give the percentage? Yeah, 78%. So the air is actually 78% nitrogen. Our plants are bathed in nitrogen. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this because nitrogen is critical to crop yield. Really critical. Because, and the reason why it is one of the most important nutrients is because we get back to glucose. When you go the nitrogen is added to the glucose to make amino acids, to make the proteins, the hormones, all these other really important compounds. So that's why, you know, having adequate nitrogen is so important to crop yield. The irony is that plants actually bathe in nitrogen, and yet nitrogen deficiencies are one of our major management issues because it's in the wrong form. It's in a form that plants can't use. But biology can change it into the right forms. The other one I want to talk about is this. This is, once again, unfortunately you can't see it. It's a list of the total nutrients in an average soil, not what is plant available. Normally when we do a soil test, we're looking, in most cases, water soluble, what dissolves in water, and that's what we call is available to the plants, and in some cases a mild acid, but some of the phosphorus we do. But the fact is soils tend to have tons of nutrients. So I'll just read this out, you know, an average sandy loam, this is, will have about 1,300 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Pounds per acre and kilograms per hectare are the same, so that's 1,340 kilograms of of nitrogen per hectare. If you go to a clay loam, that goes up to 6.5 tons per hectare. The, you know, things like magnesium, you know, you're looking at things like in a clay loam, you've got 17 tons per hectare, calcium 26 tons, potash in an average soil in the US 40 tons per hectare, phosphate 10 tons per hectare, and so on. You've got 10 tons of phosphorus per hectare. Why are you putting on a ton bag or whatever, you know, or a few hundred pounds per acre or hectare when you actually already have that in the soil? Because it's in forms that the plant can't use. But with the biology, it's the whole thing of getting the biology, it can change them. So an example, a really good example, is phosphorus. In many places around the world, lack of phosphorus is a critical issue in soils. It is, like you said, Salvador and Brazil, my country, Africa, Asia, and so people will either put on phosphoric acid or superphosphate, which is rock phosphate that's been treated with sulfuric acid. The big trouble is when you put that phosphoric acid on, most of that phosphorus will combine with the iron in the soil. That's where the average soil colour comes from. That's the iron gives this colour. Most soils have a lot of iron, and it forms iron phosphide, which plants can't use. Similarly, if you've got a lot of calcium, it forms tricalcium phosphate, which plants can't use. So, in my country, for instance, we estimate that at best, only 80% of the phosphorus fertiliser is wasted and not locked up. In most cases, 95% of what is applied is locked up. The fact is, if we test it, there are huge phosphorus reserves that are locked up. So let's start, instead of spending a lot of money on what is actually a limited and very expensive resource, into how do we unlock what we've got? If you've got tons and tons, unlock it. And this is what organic matter does, and this is what microbes do. I talked about humus. There's a whole range of organic acids. Humic, fulvic, ulmic. There's actually millions of them. It's a bit like trying to find the length of pi. They will always find new ones because these are complex. But even simple little acids like acetic acid, vinegar, which is quite common when anything breaks down. All of these things help dissolve and make minerals available. The other really important thing is to make some of these more complex ones available are enzymes. And this is what many microbes do. So we talk about phosphorus again, and getting this, these locked up forms like iron phosphate, strong acids aren't really going to help, but enzymes will. So fungi, for instance, have these enzymes. They can break it, and they'll take it all the way from where they've mined it into the plant for exchange for glucose. This is why we want to do it. So what we find out, that this is, best way I want to get back to, feed the soil. The more energy you put into that soil, the more food, the more microbes. Now it's the same thing if we're running stock. The more food we've got per hectare, the more cattle we can have, or more chickens we can have. It's the same with microbes. Think of them as our stock. They are there working for us. Let's look after them and feed them and manage them the same way we would our cattle. They're living organisms, and they're doing work. They're actually, getting all these nutrients out and providing them to our cash crop. They also do things like buffer pH. I haven't got a pH test, but this is the same. So I would say that this would be below 5 at a guess, and this would be above 5, 6. And it's the organic matter that makes the difference. It's the easiest way to bring a pH close to neutral is increase soil organic matter. It costs you nothing. It'll do it. The other one I want to talk about, I've talked about microbes, the really important concept of the rhizosphere and plant roots. The rhizosphere is actually, the name was first invented, put out around 1901. And yet it's sort of been lost, but it should be one of the most important words. It's where the greatest biodiversity on the planet is. The rhizosphere is the area around plant roots, and that's where most microbes live. So a teaspoon of soil, rhizosphere soil, will contain more living entities than every tree in the Amazon, to put things in perspective. There's trillions of microbes in it. Now, the reason why is because all those sugars, and I was talking about how the roots put out all those carbon products, those sugars, the leaf sheaths, all those compounds, that feeds all those microbes. And those microbes do a whole lot of work. one of the most important things they do, by having them covering the roots, they make a protective shield to stop diseases from coming in. They will protect diseases. And many of them, actually, we find fight diseases too. It's where we've got our antibiotics like penicillin from, for instance, from soil microbes. And they will, you know, if you've got a healthy soil, healthy microbes, you'll solve every soil disease. And I'm not joking. You know, we can do it. And also a lot of the above the soil diseases as well. Not all, but most of them. The roots also, like I said, many roots also put out enzymes that dissolve rocks. Charles Darwin wrote about that. The father of modern fertilisation, of synthetic fertilisers, Baron Justus von Liebig in Germany, he did this in the 1830s and 40s. He wrote about it. We've known for a long time that plant roots have the ability to actually, under the right systems, to extract minerals directly from rocks by putting out enzymes. But essentially what I'm trying to say is that roots are what makes good soil. But most importantly, I want to get back to what do roots do? They take the carbon dioxide that the plants have synthesized and all those products, and they put them into the soil and feed the soil. The deeper your topsoil is. It's roots combined with microorganisms that form soil. We want as much root mass as possible in the soil, and we want that to get it as deep as possible to deepen our soil and build deep soils and deep structure. Let's talk a little bit about building this picture again, humus. And humus is actually long-lasting under the right conditions. In our carbon dating work in Australia shows that the average age of humus in our forests, old-growth forests, is 2,000 years. It lasts as long as biochar and longer. You can also destroy it very quickly with bad management. It has multiple benefits. How do you build humus? Well, that's the lignins. I talked about it before. I've talked mostly about the sugar, the cellulose, as the energy source. But, you know, like I said, the reason that plant doesn't fall over and can blow, and these plants can move in the wind, they're flexible, that's lignin. It's a polymer. It's like a plastic, natural plastic. It's very resistant to be broken down. And what the microbes do is they get that and they assemble it and they build this, sponge-like structure as humus. But if we want to get lots of humus, we have to give them the basic building product of humus, which are lignins. So it's why I like to allow crop residues to get old and coarse before I break them down and recycle them into the system. So I've got lots of lignins. Doing that, you'll quickly build up very good soil with good water holding capacity. But the other thing I just want to talk about this as well, it's a polymer. You know, it's like a glue, it's sticky, it sticks this together. Stickiness in a scientific term means it's electrostatic. So also what sticks to it are the nutrients, the soil nutrients. And this is really important. In fact, when we look at the soil, it's where we find most of the nitrogen, most of the phosphorus, sulfur, pretty well all the cations. They are all, you know, where they store them is in organic matter, particularly humus. And so what I think what's really important to explain here too, because it's sticky, they don't leach out as much. They rarely leach out. Some will, but on the whole, things like nitrogen will stay in the soil and not be leached out at the end of the rainy season. In my part of the world, the sugarcane farmers are out at at planting, or when what called the ratoon, you know, where they're cut and the new one is growing up, and they're out with huge bags of ammonium nitrate or urea or whatever that costs them thousands of dollars a tonne now, and putting that out, and they'll do the same next year because none of it will be in the soil. It's all washed out, and it's causing algal blooms on the Great Barrier Reef, killing the Great Barrier Reef. The increasing humus improves the efficiency of your nitrogen use. Why are people spending thousands of dollars on nitrogen just to have it washed out? You know, it's not economic sense. Not a good business move. If by the right management we can keep it on farm. That's what we want. You know, if you paid for it, you want to use it. You don't want to wash it away. You know, no farmer wants to see it going out into the reef and killing the reef. Because one, it's losing. You know, it's their money going out there. Secondly, it's not where they want it. The really important thing is what we call, if you do a soil test, you'll hear about CEC, or you know, cation exchange capacity. I prefer the concept of TEC when I get my soil test, which is total exchange capacity. The best way to say that, that's your fuel tank in the soil. Use this same analogy. If I've got a low CEC, that's the amount of nutrients I can hold. If I've got a higher CEC, I can hold that. Now, if these are the nutrients I'm using for my crop, which one of these do you think is going to give me the better crop? The one with the least nutrients or the one with the better nutrients? You know, it's not rocket science, but it's treated like rocket science. I want to get this concept across again. You know, it's a basic concept. Instead of people being blinded by science, just look at what TEC or CEC means. What we want is our fuel tank in our soil to be as big as possible so we can hold as much in. And can I say, this is really important for row cropping, because one of the big problems with row cropping is that most of the fertilisers go in when the crop is being planted, and so the bulk of the nutrients you've got there is when the plant is about this big, so they're growing and they can't use most of it. By the time when do we need the bulk of the nutrients? When we're finishing. When it's, you know, when the corn is setting, or the fruit is setting, or whatever. That is when the major requirement is, and guess what? Under using water-soluble fertilisers, that's when you have the least. This system, it's a fuel tank. And I haven't got time to explain the science, but because it's not water-soluble, the plants use a process called ion exchange. And they can just pull these nutrients off as they need them. The best way to think about this, it's like a supermarket shelf. And they can go in and grab the food they want when they need it. What we want to make sure is that shelf is always full and not empty when they need it. And that is why we want it to be as full as possible. And that in the critical times, when the plant decides it needs nutrients, they are there for them to get. Not for us to think that they need them. Plants actually have a better idea when they need them than we do. As long as they're there, they will take them, and that way you will get higher and better yields. And that's why we need humus, and that's why we need to think about how we recycle old lignin-rich organic matter in it. Now I want to show you some of the technologies that we've found that can do this really well. This, for me, is one of the most exciting. It's by Professor Dr. David Johnson from New Mexico State University, and it's a form of composting that I've never seen anything as good and I've been involved in this for 45 years, that gets such a breakdown of beneficial microbes. And the yields he gets are just astounding, and the quality he gets by putting this out. Now what I really like about this, it can be done on any scale. You can do it you know, as a backyard gardener through to if you want to do thousands of hectares. And it's simple to put out. You know, if you're doing thousands of hectares, you can just mix up, basically make a tea or an extraction and mix it into your sprayer and spray it out. Do it from a helicopter if you want. So, and what you're in fact doing is inoculating your system with all these microbes. So, it's phenomenal. Look, another one I want to show, because this is more applicable to small acres, but because a lot of the farmers here are small acre farmers, this is a system where they make a lot of compost, and instead of tilling the ground, they lay a bed, you know, they've actually mulched out the weeds to get rid of them, lay a bed of compost and plant directly in the compost. So it's a no-till vegetable system. And it's highly productive. They are earning over $200,000 an acre. That's $500,000 a hectare, although they're actually only 2 acres. That's the size they want to be, which is very small for the United States. They actually employ 8 people. And it's a very profitable business. And I wanted to get this across because, you know, people say, oh, look, you know, get big or get out. That's the mantra where I live, and that's because so many farmers are going into debt and they it's really get big and get out, because the bank owes you because of the money you've had to put out to get big. In this case, they've actually got a 30-acre farm, but they went and got small and doing really well because it's about the system and making that system productive. In this case, you know, they're happy with that. They're quite happy making $400,000 a year. Don't know why, but anyway, that's what they do. So I'm just trying to get this across that if you get the right system, we can make small farms really productive. That's applying all around in San Francisco. But for me, you know, when I think about all the hotels and resorts and the tourists here, setting up these sorts of systems to supply the local tourist industry with fresh, local Belize fruits and vegetables, you know, that is something you could sell to the world and make, you know, that is something that could really make a difference to the local communities. And we don't need much land, the land's there, and it's one thing we're very happy to come back next year and do workshops in depth to show people how to do it. We want to see these things happening everywhere, not just on PowerPoint. I talked a little bit about this yesterday, regenerative grazing. And 68% of the world's agricultural lands are actually for grazing. And that also doesn't include a lot of the farmland is also grazed and cropped. With regenerative or holistic grazing, and I haven't got time to go into it, but what it does, it restores the ecosystem. We can actually increases the soil organic matter. It's one of the fastest ways to increase soil organic matter. We can dramatically increase stocking densities, produce, you know, good quality animals, and we can also use it in conjunction with cropping, and that's what I want to show you. I showed you one example of the pasture cropping, where they use the regenerative holistic grazing and graze it down, and then plant in after the animals have been through. Because the advantage of it is particularly, you can do it with anything. You do it with sheep. I know people do it with chickens. In most cases it's with cattle. And because you're more grazing them, you get a much more efficient use of feed, because they're actually forced to eat everything. But the other thing they do is they trample down all the weeds. Hooves sort of smash up the weeds. There's manure and you know, break up the ground, and they fertilise it and just stimulate all this biological activity. And we find that after they've been through, then put in a cover crop, and you get really good results. So in this case, I just want to show one of the studies I showed yesterday is carbon dioxide. This is in Arizona. It was land that's completely degraded, and they managed, you know, in 3 years they were doing, you know, just under 14 metric tons of soil organic matter a year increase. So you can do things very rapidly with the right systems. And what I'm trying to show you now are systems. So this, you know, I want to get back to this picture again so you can understand what we're talking about by using the right grazing system as a weed management, you know, or cover crop management tool. That by putting the animals in and knocking it down, or if you want, you can see that you use a tractor and slasher, a mulcher. It's the same principle. Go over and knock the vegetation down, like the ground cover or cover crop. It'll shed its roots, it'll knock it down, and then you plant your cash crop in. And unfortunately you can't see that too well. So I'll give you, this is another example of how we do it in Australia. This is probably an improvement now on the original one with modified no-till. What he puts his animals through, sometimes to make sure all the weeds are down, he'll put his mulcher over it and mulch all up so it rots in. Then he uses this implement as his planting implement, which just has some little rotors, very narrow, but they break the roots because pasture has strong roots, and just does, you see the small strips where they've broken the roots. It loosens up the soil actually, and he plants in there. And the only thing he puts on is a little bit of guano, mixed basically in pellet form, at planting. One of the things we've learned, if you can get that biology and that fertility on the seed right in the beginning, you get higher yields. You know, with any crop, the faster you can get the crop to get away, the stronger that crop will be. And so that's all he spends. It's not much, you know. It's about 50 pounds an acre he puts on, 50 kilograms a hectare. It's nothing. And he grows, in this case, that's a cover crop, mixed species that he will graze down again, and plant it densely, and then he puts his animals on again. But if he wants to, you know, he can grow oats or corn or wheat or whatever cash crop he wants as well in these systems. Minimal cost. And the advantage is, like I said before, you're getting two crops. You're getting the money from animals and the money from your crop, and your cost of production is a fraction. Here's some of the other examples of systems where, in this case, rye is used, and then it's rolled, and the planter is put in, and you know, into the rolled rye. This is annual rye, so when you roll it, it dies. But it's planted really, really thickly, so it kills the weeds. It stops competition. You've got a bed of thick bed of dead rye on the ground, and by doing that, you actually stop weeds. If you want weeds to germinate, the best thing to do is open up the soil and expose it to the sunlight. You know, that's how you get weeds. Ploughing is one of the best ways to get weeds. Sorry?
Does that grow in the tropics, that rye?
Look, there are rye you can use. This is annual rye, but yeah, you could do that in the winter here. What I would use, I prefer to use in the tropics, is oats. Oats, for me, we've used them in every climate, and there's oats that do well in the tropics. And the reason I like oats is that if I want to actually get a feed crop as well, I can use it like that as an early cash crop, and in this case, they planted soybeans in it. And they get, they actually get really high yields. Another example here is, that's not so good here, but most temperate places plant vetch that's winter growing. It dies as soon as it gets warm. And so as it starts to flower, that's your signal. And you roll it. And in this case, they just plant the corn in or drill it in, and it grows up because you've got, one, you get all the nitrogen from the veg because it's a legume, you don't have to put any nitrogen fertiliser, and because you've got this cover of veg, it keeps all the weeds down. My grandfather is one who actually taught me about veg. He used to use it in his orchard. He lived in the Mediterranean climate where they got the rain in winter, and he would grow it, use that to grow the veg, and that would give all the nitrogen and big cover. As summer comes and it dries up, or spring comes and the plants come to life now, the veg works as a mulch, stops the sun baking the soil, suppresses the weeds, and gave all the nitrogen that he needed for his fruit crop. You know, a lot of these things we've known about for a long time. You know, my grandfather taught me this in the 1950s. I just want to show you here that these new no-tills, for instance, are yielding higher than the conventional average in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania keeps figures of yields, and they're getting 160 bushels an acre compared to of corn, compared to the district average of 130. So, you know, these sorts of technologies are really exciting because they are higher yielding at lower cost. Look at the difference in diesel. The 130 bushels an acre, they use, in this case, I converted it through to metric, 230 litres per hectare. The organic no-till, 77 litres. That's a huge saving, you know, and that's what we've got to do in farming. So these sorts of systems, we can get high yields at lower costs. So what I want to end on is why a lot of farms cannot increase soil organic matter. People say it's because of tillage. I can show you lots of tillage systems that increase soil organic matter. It's not tillage, it's a type of tillage, I want to say, and I haven't got time to go into it. Some types of tillage are really destructive. We know there are other types of tillage that we can use that will improve soil. So I'm not a, you know, tillage is the demon. And some types of tillaging, like harrowing, can be very good. And in the case of a light harrow, the bit of organic matter which gets broken down, actually you want that to be broken down, because what does this organic matter get broken down into in the soil? Glucose. And what does glucose do? It feeds. So these sorts of light harrows are actually another way of feeding the system. It's not, you know, when you start thinking in terms of feeding the most important stock that you have on your farm, your microorganisms, you start seeing how certain types of practices can be really beneficial. And light harrowing is one that you're doing, you're talking about. You know, I thought that there's a role for that. But what I want to show, the thing that really depletes soil carbon, which is what organic matter is, are nitrogen fertilisers. And there's two very good studies done by the University of Illinois in what's called the Morrow plots, and they're the second oldest research plots in the world. The oldest, Rothamsted, started in the 1840s in England, and these are continuous experiments. Anyway, the Morrow plot started about 20 years later because people from Illinois went and saw them and thought, this is a good idea, we'll do the same. So they've got fields, for instance, that have never ever had fertiliser on them. And most of the fertilisation that we know, as Ronnie said at our introduction, came after World War II, because things like urea, ammonium nitrate, all these weren't developed as fertilisers. Primarily, they were actually developed as the basis of armaments, and after World War II had massive overproduction of these products. So it's decided that the best place to put them is in the soil and sell them to farmers. What So the Morrow plots have got fields where these have never been used, and then they've got different plots that different amounts of synthetic nitrogen have been used that came in after World War II. And basically what they found was that using synthetic nitrogen caused a loss of 10,000 kilograms of soil carbon per hectare per year. That's the soil carbon. That's on top of the crop residue. Most of the crop residue just goes up as carbon dioxide. Instead of, best way to put it is, what's happening, instead of getting that used in the soil, we're wasting it and putting it up in the air as greenhouse gases. They actually found a relationship. The greater the use of synthetic nitrogen, the greater the loss of soil organic matter. So I showed you in the beginning, right in the beginning, the comparison trials in soil quality, one where the soil had the rain, one got eroded, the other didn't. The other one, in terms of the one that survived the drought, and the other one didn't, and it was all to do with organic matter. The ones that did worse were the ones, of course, that used synthetic nitrogen. We think, without it we're not going to get a crop. So how do we do this? Because we've got a whole generation, or 2 generations, or 3 generations of farmers since 70 years ago that only know one way to get nitrogen, or primarily one way, and that is synthetic fertilizers. Let's look at soil. Soil organic matter. When we analyse good soil organic matter, it has a carbon to nitrogen ratio. All soil organic matter has, and that's generally between 9 to 1 to 12 to 1. Like all these things in nature, there's always variability. But what I'd like to say, just for the sake of an exercise to explain how much it is, let's use 10 to 1. That's a really easy number. And what that will mean, now I won't go into the maths, but the maths I'm using to make an average soil, I'm using from Dr. Christine Jones. But what I'd like to show you is this. You can check my maths later if you want, but I don't want to bore you with it. But what I've got there is soil organic carbon, but the soil organic matter is equivalent of 1.72. That's the ratio we use for soil organic carbon, because some texts I'll talk about soil organic carbon, some will talk about soil organic matter. They're not the same, there's a slight difference. But essentially, if we have just under 2% soil organic matter, that means we have 2,400 kilograms of nitrogen in a hectare, or 2,400 pounds of nitrogen in an acre. Go up to something like 6% soil organic matter, and you've got around 9 tonnes of nitrogen per hectare, 9,000 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So I'd ask, okay, if you've got 6%, which is what I think people should have, why would you be buying nitrogen if you've already got 9 tonnes in there? 9,000 pounds. Yeah. There's something really wrong, isn't it? Don't you think, what's going on? If you've got all this nitrogen in the soil, why do you need it? The answer is you don't. What is going wrong is the management. And you need to learn how to manage this. And the way you manage it is by making it biologically active. Now, you'll get old school agronomists who say that plants only take up nitrogen as nitrate or as ammonium. That's what I was taught. And they don't take other forms. That is not true. And the science we have now, when we look at natural systems, actually taking them up as nitrate and ammonium is actually the least way they take it up. And there are multiple ways they take it up. And they will take them up, for instance, as amino acids, or the precursors of amino acids, peptides. And in most natural systems, that's how they get it, and that's how this nitrogen, that's what this nitrogen is. It's beautiful nitrogen. It doesn't leach out like nitrate does into the soil, into the water, and it doesn't volatilize into nitrous oxide like most of the chemical fertilizers, or turn to ammonium, which goes into ammonia and then volatilizes and forms greenhouse gases. This is good nitrogen, and it stays there and it can be used. What you have to do is feed, basically get that system biologically active, and you will get that nitrogen happening. So those systems I showed you before, getting high yields, they weren't putting packets of nitrogen on. They were getting the biology to get the nitrogen for them. Let's look at some of the ways we can do this as well, help the biology get nitrogen. This is in Brazil, actually Sao Paulo state, but up in the mountains where it's cooler, and they do grapes. And here they intercrop in winter with lupins, because lupins are a winter growing vegetable. When the grapes are sleeping, use lupins. My grandfather used vetches. There's clovers that can do it. There's a whole range of legumes that you can use. So that's not competing with the grapes, they're asleep. But when they wake up, they get a nice surprise. They've got all this nitrogen and organic matter. Lovely, lovely present for spring. Okay, this is, I'd like to spend more time on this. This is what we've done in Africa, and now with tens of thousands of farmers growing maize, and intercrop it with desmodium. It's a low prostrate legume. Remember, getting back to the rule, which I want to get back to, the most important rule is sunlight. So we want our cover crop, our cash crop, to get the sunlight, and what it's not using, we can use for our cover crop. So this is this principle here, that instead of having bare ground, let's put leaves over it, and those leaves, fix nitrogen. There's another thing they do, I've heard it said before, allelopathy. We're using this thing called selective allelopathy now, where there are certain plants that we can grow with our crop that will kill weeds. Desmodium puts out compounds that causes the suicidal germination of weed seeds, but feeds the corn with nitrogen. Now, this is what we call selective allelopathy, and we're learning more and more about these sorts of plants and building up lists of them now so we can bring them into our farming system. So instead of this idea, we nuke and eradicate all weeds, we can start looking at what we call functional biodiversity. We bring in biodiversity that gives us functions. And another function desmodium does, it puts out another set of compounds, phenolics, that repel the stem borer from the corn. And so with this system, we took yields from less than 1 tonne a hectare to over 10 tonnes a hectare in Kenya and places. And like I said, it's been scaled up to probably more than 100,000 by now farmers, and still being scaled up. And by the way, used in all different sorts of crops. This is what we did in organic sugarcane in Australia, and instead of, the way we wanted to control the weeds was shade them out, and we tried a whole range of legumes like lab and so on. We actually found soybeans were the best. In Egypt and Thailand, when they've done it, they actually found mung beans work very well, and as well as soybeans. Now that gives all the nitrogen. So we're doing it each year while we return the cane. It is suppressing the weeds because the weeds don't get sunlight. But we're using the sunlight our cane isn't using, so it's not competing with the cane. And and producing, soybeans. Now, in Thailand and in Egypt, for instance, the soy and mung actually now bring far more money than the sugarcane. I don't know if anybody here is a sugarcane farmer, but it's not a good time for growing sugarcane. But if you put soybeans down, at least you'll make some money instead of a loss. The other one is that we can use it as high protein stock food. For us, the most important thing is that also, because we're growing sugar, is that we got more sugar per hectare with this system than without it. We get paid, as a sugar, you get paid on what we call commercial sugar content, CCS. And we increased it with this system. So this is a system. We don't have to use any herbicides, and we're getting 2 yields if you want. A lot of farmers in Australia don't bother harvesting the soy. They're just happy to get the free nitrogen. That saves them thousands of dollars. This is a version of the one I showed before with the corn, where they've actually used desmodium and alfalfa as another legume grown with chilies, and dramatically increased the yields of chilies, and also it repels pests. I'm just about to finish. Yeah. So the other thing I want to talk about is this. So I've just showed legumes and things that will fix nitrogen. We can use them for other factors. I'll be finished in this. I'm just getting to the last slide, and then we do it. Is that there are lots of free living nitrogen fixes. It's not just legumes. People think, oh, we haven't got legumes. The fact is, when I showed you that 10:1 nitrogen ratio, actually most of that nitrogen hasn't been fixed by legumes. It's actually been fixed by free living microorganisms. Remember what I said about getting air in the soil? That's 78% nitrogen. They will take that nitrogen and turn it into the type of nitrogen the plant wants. The other one we know now is we have in soils are what we call endophytic nitrogen fixes. And you can buy some now. It's basically like, legumes have what are called rhizobium that live in bulbs and fix the nitrogen and feed the plant in exchange. That's in exchange for glucose. That's the way they're doing it. It's the same with these. They do the same deal. They give the plant nitrogen if the plant gives them glucose. And we're starting to this is starting to be commercialised as a technology. You can already buy some strains for sugarcane, rice, and a range of crops. So, but with good management, we actually know there's billions of species of these already in the soil. So without even at this stage waiting for commercial species, by good soil organic matter, you can fix all this. So what I just want to end on is this, is that the fact is that what we need to do is rethink farming. That it's about solar energy, collecting it, to get that to get that as glucose, the basic molecule of life, and getting that into the soil to feed the most biodiversity we can, and that will give us multiple ecosystem services. I've just talked a little bit about soils and nutrients today, but we can talk about pest control, more on weed control, and all these other issues by using this general principle. You start rethinking your farm on these lines, and believe you'll become a successful farmer. I struggled for years as a farmer. And it wasn't until I was my third farm, I made a lot of mistakes, that I, in the end, became a very successful farmer and used to export produce all around the world. And I'm saying this from experience, but what I'm also trying to show you is there's science behind it as well. It's good practice and good science. And I hope that's what you take away, that what I've done is I've got your interest happening and you want to explore this, because what we're doing now is opening infinite possibilities and what is technically an incredible future for agriculture. So thank you.